Karan Singh, Commercial Lead at Xandr. We're here today at the Drum Labs in Shoreditch, where I'm going to be joined by two industry experts, and we're going to be discussing what recipes and ingredients are required for programmatic success in 2021 and beyond. Follow me. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dora and Lauren, great to have you with us today. Tell us a bit about yourselves.
My name is Dora Mikhail-Clendenin. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at the Ozone Project, and I have been in the industry for nearly 20 years.
And I'm Lauren Ogundecker. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Bicycle London, which is a new media agency that's just been set up, and I've been in the industry just over 16 years.
Amazing. As an industry, I feel like we're in an exciting and yet pivotal time. Loads going on in terms of regulation, things surrounding identity, and also things like transparency. As exciting as it is, I feel like we found ourselves in this position because programmatic and digital more holistically has grown so quickly. And in that period, I don't think as an industry, we've had the chance to kind of stop and take our breath. What I wanted to do today, with your expertise, of course, is to almost stop and take a breath and say, if we were to start today in 2021, what would be the core ingredients if we forget about the problems that have been created by the industry, if we looked at just what those core components could be of programmatic and digital moving forward to set us up for success in the long term? I've asked you both to bring in some core ingredients that would make up what that would look like going forward. Dora, I asked you first if you could bring in an ingredient to share with us. And the ingredient that we have here is a simple, yet super important one, and it's water. So what does water represent?
Transparency. I think the point that you're making around just how quickly we have moved in this industry, it's been super exciting. There's been no precedents. We've almost made it up as we've gone along, but we've forgotten some of the core ingredients, and I think transparency needs to be at the core. So for me, transparency's got to be key, and it can represent transparency around how the technology is used, technology around how consumers are targeted with ads across the web. You know, there's just so many ways in which it doesn't have to be this opaque, unknown entity. And for many, many years, that's sort of what it was. And that's in part because we were going so fast.
As digital has made up more and more of advertiser spend, I feel from my conversation with advertisers that there's more scrutiny from their own organizations to provide transparency in terms of, you know, what's being invested into this medium, and kind of where that's going. How are you seeing it from the agency side?
So from an agency side, now that I'm in a smaller agency, it's probably more acute. Clients don't have infinite budgets. I'm working with direct-to-consumer brands who are very particular about how much they're spending and where that goes, because they've got investors to report back into. So they need to know that every impression that's meant to be delivered is actually delivered, because it's going to add towards their reporting for growth. It's a challenge to be extremely transparent about everything, because we're in the dark about the entire ecosystem. I can't say to a client that this happens here and there, because I don't know myself. So that, to your point, Dora, that whole transparency thing needs to be probably turned on its head. And we need to get to a point where we're honest about the fees that go into what we do, whether it's tech fees, whether it's management fees. We just have to get to that point where we're being a bit honest, because there's certain brands that just don't have the luxury of just being able to spend anyhow.
When we talk about transparency as an industry, we often default to fee transparency. But I think there's so many more elements that go into transparency that we haven't yet fixed. Consumers are becoming more savvy to kind of data regulation and how their data is being used and how that funds content, etc. What do you think needs to happen from a consumer perspective to get transparency?
We've seen that there has to be quite a big story for consumers to pay attention. So the one in my mind is the Cambridge Analytica stuff. You know, that was a big story, and that made consumers pay attention. The day-to-day person probably isn't thinking about how their data is being used. We think about it all the time because that's our world. So, you know, when I see another cookie banner, you know, I read it. You know, I just, maybe that makes me really sad, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure most consumers outside of our industry just press accept, but they don't really know what they're saying yes to. For our own responsibility in our industry, for me, it's always been just because you can doesn't mean you should when it comes to data ethics. And I think that's a route that we probably need to explore.
Yeah. We touched on transparency, and I'm sure we can geek out on this forever. Cool. So the next ingredient that we've got was brought in by Lauren.
It's an egg. So it represents choice. You can break an egg and do lots of different things with it. You can scramble it, you can make an omelette. If we look at our industry and the lack of, I guess, choice on one end, so if you flip one way and look at Illumiscape, for example, it will tell you that there's all these different sort of tech platforms that are out there. But then if you really dig deep and look at it on a sort of macro level, choice doesn't really exist that much. If I refer back to the Competition Markets Authority, they did a report, actually, an investigation, let's call it what it is, last year into the industry and monopoly. The findings, we all know, is that there are some key players that have most of the monopoly around the industry, around programmatic, obviously Google with DV360, Facebook with their solutions, and how much choice does an advertiser have in order to do new things, to work with new DSPs, to just have a different approach to their media buying. That doesn't really exist anymore, and I think it's getting worse and worse. There's a lack of innovation because before a new platform comes in, I've heard lots of stories about them being bought up or their technology probably being sort of siphoned. We're getting into a very dangerous place where if that isn't sort of controlled, there will be no choice because you are going to choose between 1, 2, 3 or 4. And that 3 or 4 is actually just the crumbs because those big tech players haven't been stopped and they're just capturing more and more and more of the industry. So that's the point of the egg.
It's like you say for the Lumiscope, if you look at that, in theory, you can work with anyone.
Yeah.
In practice, you have to work with certain players. And actually, when I speak to brands, every business is different and they're all looking for something different to create competitive advantage.
Yep.
So for me, the lack of choice stifles the ability to differentiate you from your competitor, which makes advertising, marketing, just general business much more difficult. If we were to bring this ingredient of choice into the digital landscape today, what would that represent for you?
I think Lauren's point has been so well made, and it really speaks to some of the founding principles of the Ozone Project. So we are a platform built by publishers for advertisers. And we've made no secret of the fact that we want to offer an alternative. We want to offer a way that buyers who are used to buying in a specific way from Facebook, from Google, and let's be honest, what they do is they've done a great job of creating the tech to allow for that. We want to create an alternative, and that's what we're busy building, and that's what our publishers are focused on.
Yeah, and I can't say how important the Ozone Project is. It is incredibly important because we are getting into that place where we need another alternative. I need to be able to say to my clients, you don't have to go with A or B. You can actually go with C, D, E, F, G because there's a plethora of choice. So yeah, it's a really important initiative.
If I may, I'll bring my ingredient to the mix here because I think it follows on really nicely from that, and that is salt. Ooh. I think the salt represents the staple in the cupboard. For me, it represents service. Through lack of choice or the limitation of choice, I think that stifles service. If we were starting again, I think that service would be upped and we'd kind of be at a level where everyone's competing to offer different levels of service that works for the advertiser that they're working with, and that would just be kind of by default what happens. In terms of service, if we were starting in today, what would that look like?
From my perspective, now that I'm in a challenger agency, I'm working with brands with smaller budgets, not tiny budgets, but just smaller than the larger networks. It's not necessarily viable for me to set up a programmatic trading team because there's lots of complexities. How many DSPs do you have an agreement with? And actually, a managed service is perfect right now because it allows me to still offer that service, but it doesn't allow, I don't have to get too deep into like activation, which right now isn't the focus for me because I'm trying to kind of get to quicker, better, faster.
I think everyone should be bought into what the end consumer is trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think we could be better at that. And I think if I was to look at what the industry should look like, it would be around making programmatic easier to buy, buying things in a scalable way, in a safe and transparent way, and a way that drives results is something that's got to be key going forward, right?
Definitely. Another principle, I think, of what we've created with the Ozone Project is that ease of buying. There are a number of ways in which you can buy publisher inventory and audiences, but that takes time and resource to the point that Lauren is making. They're not there yet. I'm sure, I have no doubt that Bicycle will get there, but you're not there yet in terms of your own trading team. You don't have time to pick up the phone to all the publishers that you would love to work with. And so we've tried to create a single point of access through which you can reach premium publishers just via us. You were talking about the sort of the service layer and how important it is. It's a long time since we talked about programmatic being plug and play, right? Remember those days when it was just, just do that connection and it will run itself. That's not a thing anymore.
No.
So much service is required to make sure that we can do all of the things that we've talked about, which is just data ethics and transparency and all of those things, providing all of that choice. That's where the service layer becomes so key and the ease of buying becomes so key.
Yeah.
Cool. So far what we've got is the water that represents transparency, the egg representing choice, the salt representing service. The last one, we asked the drum to bring along a key ingredient. I know this is one that's kind of close to all our hearts and some of the work that we do outside of our day-to-day jobs. And that is spices. And what we have here in terms of what spices represents is the element of inclusion. In terms of what we do going forward. So the top of most brands' agendas at the moment, and just more kind of generally across society, is around kind of being more inclusive in everything that you do. And I don't think that's lost on digital or advertising more holistically.
What an inclusive media plan looks like is the placements, the creatives, right? So if I'm saying to a client that you're launching a new brand, and that new brand is talking to mothers, for example, and it's selling a piece of clothing for newborn babies, and I'm just making all of that up. But I need to be able to tell them or show them that the placements that I'm going to find are diverse placements, so that the publishers are diverse. Are they included in a DSP offering? Are they included in a publisher offering, like a wider publisher offering? That's the first question. Then the second thing is, are the creatives inclusive? So you're speaking to lots of different types of mums. It's not just one type of mum that you're speaking to. Please make sure that those creatives are inclusive.
I agree with everything Lauren has just said. I think everything there that is so important. It's not necessarily in our DNA yet as an industry. It's so important to know how you're targeting and what your messaging looks like, and you get that by making sure that you've got people around the table who understand that group of people.
As an industry, it's not in our DNA yet. And I think until it gets there, there's always going to be a slight lack of authenticity in how it's approached. And I think for me, if the one thing was key is about it being sincere and authentic rather than just jumping on a bandwagon. And that is key.
We are so conscious, I think, as consumers of where we spend our money. And I think it's important that brands give the consumers an understanding of who they are authentically. If you're a brand that cares about climate change, show how you do that. Or if you're a brand that cares about other sort of social justices, put your money where your mouth is.
That makes perfect sense, and it's a great way to kind of end this. I think we have put together what is likely not to make a delicious meal. Probably talks more to my culinary skills than actually the ingredients here. But what I will say is I think we've got the kind of core ingredients of transparency, choice, service, and DE&I that I don't think many people would argue would be the kind of crux and the core pieces of the jigsaw as we kind of move forward into kind of 2021 and beyond. So with that, I'd love to thank you for kind of joining me today. It's been super useful, and thank you very much.